Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Prehm, Erik, Skopil, Mack on the show today. Mailbag Monday, or whenever you're listening to it. It's just a mailbag edition of the podcast. A lot of good questions, and we're in that spot, Erik and Jared, where we're talking football, but we're also bleeding over into basketball. And I think part of that is because, hey, look, both the men and the women are actually playing pretty good now. When last month or so, couldn't say that.
It was really a bleak time for Oregon athletics there in like the month of December to early January. It was like none of the teams were playing well. There was all sorts of chaos for football with coaching. Men and women's teams were just losing left and right. And now in the last week, and we recorded this a few hours before Oregon's going to tip off against UConn on the women's side. We could have 4 wins by the men and women's teams over top 10 ranked teams in the last 4 days.
Yeah.
So pretty fun times there. Yeah, as Matt said, we're going to split it. We're going to start with some football recruiting, get into some team football, and then we're going to close with a couple questions on the basketball stuff. So a little bit more of a variance in topics today, but that's to be expected. As Matt said, we're kind of moving to that point of the year where basketball is becoming a focal point, and that's fun for us. I love covering those teams, but there's still going to be a lot of football talk because Dan Lanning is hitting the recruiting trail, and signing day is a couple weeks away. So it's going to be kind of a fun couple weeks. So we're going to start with recruiting, but we're not focused on the 2022 class. We're going to start with some 23 questions. To open from @QuackAttack74, what are some of the top tier players that Oregon has a good shot to land in the 2023 recruiting class? Hashtag Odds and Audibles, by the way. I think everybody used the hashtag today, so good on you. And that doesn't mean I won't ask your question if you don't use it, but it does help. Matt, I don't know how many you want to run through because we want to keep this a fairly reasonable show, and this is the 23 class and you're early, but I'm sure you've got dozens of names, but let's try to keep it somewhat time sensitive here.
Sure.
Not 15 minutes.
I think your first question is, let's look internally in the state of Oregon, and there's one name that Oregon's in a really good spot with and that's Riley Williams, who's the 6th best tight end in the country, and he's almost a top 100 player. 6'6", 230 pounds. His older brother just finished up a career at Oregon as a walk-on. He plays for a high school that's produced plenty of Oregon players in the past, most recently Brady Breeze, Lamar Winston. Go back a couple of years, Alex Balducci played there as well. So that would be my first response. Well, let's look and turn inside the state. Then regionally and in the Pacific Northwest, there's a couple guys. Jaden Lamar is a 4-star running back from the Washington area, Seattle. He's going to be on campus later. And then you have Jaden Wayne, who's a 5-star defensive lineman from the Tacoma area. He was actually on campus this past weekend for an unofficial visit. So those are 3 names, I think, just regionally that Oregon is in a really good position with. Offensive tackle Spencer Fanu was a guy that's been on campus multiple times. He's from Utah. Oregon is in a really good spot there for him as well. And then you want to look at quarterbacks, and Oregon's got quite a bit of options that they could go after here. There's probably 4 or 5 guys that they are in a good position with to go after, and it's now just pick. Most recently, Anthony Johnson was a 4-star quarterback from Kansas. He was on campus this past weekend as well. So there are a lot of names. There will be more names that will emerge, most definitely, across the board. On offense, on defense, that Oregon will go after and try and get. And we should already know that they've already got one commit, Cole Martin, a 4-star player from the state of Arizona at Basha High School in Chandler, Arizona.
Well, and we should know that's the son of an Oregon assistant coach. And there's another actual offer that went out on Saturday to another, we talked in-state, Tatum Tuioti, the son of defensive line coach Tony Tuioti, also was offered. He's going to play his high school ball at where Matt went to high school, which is Sheldon. So an opportunity to see him up close and personal He received an Oregon offer on Saturday. Had previously been offered by Nebraska and Washington and Kansas State, and several schools like that. So this is a pretty high end prospect, like a high 3-star, not quite 4-star guy. So certainly some names to know there. Now I think the 23 class is going to be interesting because we kind of have to reset the board a little bit because the previous staff, obviously, there are guys that are like, you're going to recruit regardless just because they're top guys out west, and the previous staff has done a good job of, assessing that. I think there's also guys that the new staff will come in and build relationships with that maybe we're not as familiar with, and that's what's going to be kind of interesting to see develop here over the next couple of weeks and months. Is I think even in the 2022 class, there's certain prospects Oregon wasn't maybe in on that they've kind of entered the picture for late here because of the new staff and kind of relationships there. So there could be names. This list for 23 is going to grow, I think, quite a bit over the next couple of weeks as we see kind of how the staff sort of shakes out in terms of how they want to approach this and who they like and all of that. So we're going to be this list will be growing, I think, over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Lanning talked about that in his first offseason press conference, where he said that he didn't want to come in with preconceived notions about the players on his team. I also feel like that translates into the recruiting trail as well. The previous staff did an excellent job in finding talent and on the West Coast. And what I'm most excited for is to see what Lanning and his staff, which has a lot of Southeastern recruiters, what they look like on the recruiting trail in the Southeast. Obviously, it's going to be really important for Oregon to set their culture and establish themselves as a West Coast recruiting power, as they have in the last few years, especially with USC coming to fruition. And you always have talent on the West Coast, whether it be from California or Oregon or Washington. Arizona has been a hotbed too recently for across the country teams. But I think that's what I'm most interested in seeing. And the class of 23 is where we're going to really begin to dive into what they could possibly do. It's just too late for the class of 22. Oregon might be able to sign somebody from one of those Southeastern states just because they didn't enroll at wherever they were committed to. That we'll find out in a couple weeks in National Signing Day. But the class of 23 has a lot of top tier talent, obviously. And a lot of that comes on the West Coast. But with Lanning and Tosh Lupoi's connections like down in the Southeast, I think that's what I'm most excited for, to see, who they can pull and what type of performance an SEC body of players would perform in the Pac-12, and see how that works. That could be a significant advantage for Oregon if they are able to pull more kids from that area. It could turn out to mean absolutely nothing. But the class of 23 is where we're going to find that out. Just overall, in terms of top tier guys, I think the biggest name, Riley Williams obviously is one of them, but I think for me it's Jaden Wayne, the defensive end out of Washington. He's been on campus a handful of times.
Oregon was actually the first school to offer him a couple of years ago at the SNL camp. So he's been around here a while.
Yeah, he's had a lot of unofficial visits with the new staff. We'll get another official visit. I think that's priority number one for Oregon in terms of recruiting. Washington has had a lot of talent in the Seattle area that has not stayed in state. I think Wayne has one current crystal ball, which is a projection of Miami, which is a confidence of 1. So I think that's just an early swing and maybe a miss. I think Washington will obviously put on the full court press for him, just like they did for JT Tuamale and Emeka Egbuka. But those are two examples of guys who weren't afraid to leave the state to go where it best suits them. And whether Wayne leaves for Oregon or Wayne leaves for Miami or I don't know, Texas A&M, who knows? But I think he's the number one guy if you could have a wish list of 2023 right now for Oregon. I think he could, and he's a defensive end. So, and playing for a defensive coach with a defensive coordinator who coaches D-line, who's an excellent recruiter, is definitely an advantage for Oregon to have right now and should be going forward.
We should note that a lot of what 2023 will look like we won't probably have a good idea of just the sheer numbers on probably for 4 or 5 more months. I mean, Oregon probably is going to have to operate with the ability to be pretty fluid here. try and sign as many guys, take as many commitments as you can, but also be prepared that that number may have to get chopped down, because right now there are 11 guys on this roster that'll be a senior in 2022. They have, by our count, 5 available scholarships to use at their disposal right now. So they could sign 5 guys this offseason. Let's say 5 high school players, but that doesn't increase the number of seniors on this team. They could go out and they could add 5 seniors to this team, or 5 guys that will play just 1 year of college football at Oregon. And that could then explode to 16 scholarship numbers. And then there's a bunch of underclassmen, Jamal Hill, Mace Funa, Brandon Dorless, Stephen Jones. What do these guys do when they finish 2022? Do they go pro, or do they come back for what would be their 5th year of college football? And same things for Dante Manning, Noah Sewell, Justin Flo. There's a couple others out there that I'm missing. Byron Cardwell, or not Byron Cardwell, sorry. Keon Ware-Hudson. There's a couple other sophomores that are going to be 4th-year sophomores or 3rd-year sophomores in 2022 that would be draft eligible after next season. And how many of those guys go pro, which could then increase this number up to closer to its full 25.
Now, because of the COVID year, I don't know if people still understand it. There's like continuing to be lasting implications of that, because like what Matt is saying is true. Is like there's guys who are on the roster. They say they're 1 year, but they really have they've been around longer than that. I mean, you know that, yeah. So it's like it's hard to kind of sometimes do the scholarship math of like, okay, in theory they've been here 3 years, but they're like Sewell's going to be a sophomore technically, even though he's played every single one of Oregon's games the last 2 years, but one of the years just didn't count. So he will, I would think, likely go pro after, but in theory he would still, if he wants to return, have 2 more seasons. So it's like one of those things where it's just funky to figure out. So it's
so weird.
hard to kind of figure some of this out. So all right, next one from at Austin 701210508. By the way, last time we did a mailbag, I actually properly guessed what the significance of the Twitter handle was. I don't know if I can do that for this one, because this one does not look like a birthday. This looks like maybe a cell phone number, if that something like that. Anyway, Austin wants to know which one of the 4 quarterback targets in the 23 class are we most likely to land, and he does use the hashtag odds and audibles. Matt, you did mention Oregon is in on some high-end quarterbacks. Avery Johnson was out here recently. There's a couple of other names that are big-time prospects Oregon is in on. Is it too early to have a feel for who are they most likely to land, or kind of where you're at with that position right now?
Yeah, I think it's too early to come out and say that Oregon is in a position where you feel confident they're going to land one of these 4. And I'm assuming he's talking about Pierce Clarkson, who's a 4-star quarterback from St. John Bosco, Jaden Rashada, who's a 4-star quarterback from Pittsburgh in California. And then you also have Nicholas Iamalave from Downey, California. He's a 5-star. And then after that, you could be talking about Gabari Johnson, who's a 4-star from Lincoln in Tacoma, or maybe you're also talking about Javance Tupuola Johnson. I'm just going to butcher that. Who's a 3-star from West Hills, California. I think you have to throw Avery Johnson in there as well. I mean, the fact that he paid his way this early to come to Eugene is pretty significant. I would be surprised if they land a quarterback that's not in that mix of names. But to sit here and say that there's one guy that leads above the rest right now feels more like a guess that you could go back and then claim that you were right when you were just kind of guessing.
Yeah, it's so early. And again, I do think we have to acknowledge the new staff part makes this a little difficult because like these offers were made to most of these kids by the previous staff. Yeah. And I'm sure like most of those names are takes because those are the best guys out west. And we should know that sounds like I think it's a pretty high end class for quarterbacks out west in 2023. I mean, there's a lot of top 150 kids in the Southern California area. There's some top kids up in Washington as well. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think if Oregon's able to get one of those guys, almost regardless, they're getting a high-end player, a capable player. And what I think will be interesting to kind of track here is stylistically, and this maybe kind of gets us to the next couple of questions, but stylistically, what does Kenny Dillingham want out of a quarterback? What kind of priorities, and some of this will be, what is the offense going to be? Are you going to rely on an offense? Like we just saw a couple of years here where Anthony Brown and Tyler Shuck were asked to run the ball quite a bit. How much of that are we going to see? Are we going to see some RPO stuff out of Dillingham? I know we've seen a little of that in the past. Is there a fit at quarterback with some of the names that we've just mentioned in 23 for that? Are you going to see a shift at all? I mean, these are the questions we're asking right now, and I know we're going to get to questions asking us kind of like what specifically Kenny Dillingham's offense is going to look like at Oregon, and I think there's some questions on it. So I'm kind of hedging that part right now, but I do think we're going to learn some of these answers based upon kind of what they look for at quarterback. So that'll be kind of another component of the quarterback position in 23. I'll be curious for is just how does it fit Dillingham's offense, and maybe what does it say about what he looks for in a quarterback?
This is a really talented West Coast group of quarterbacks. A lot of high 4 stars, a 5-star, just some quality players across the board. Matt, like you said, Avery Johnson like paying his way out early or this early in the recruiting cycle is pretty interesting. 24/7 Sports has Dillingham listed as his primary recruiter when he was at Florida State. So that's already an established connection. And Johnson is a top 150 quarterback ranked by 24/7 Sports. There's certainly Oregon is certainly going after some big fish. There hasn't been this overall change in philosophy from Cristobal and his staff, where they do want to try to acquire the best type of talent that they can, and the offers still go out. And as Erik mentioned, a lot of these offers were from the previous staff, and the new staff is just taking over. And a lot of times recruits say re-offering. I don't really think that's a thing, but they are reestablishing connections with these players, and Oregon is reestablishing connections with these big time players because that's what they believe will help them get to a different level. Lanning said in his press conference that players make coaches great, and great players make great coaches. So these are potential great players. They're ranked this highly for a reason. But it's still, obviously, it's too early in the class 23 cycle to really tell where people are going to end up. A lot of the high star players like to finish their recruiting cycles usually before playoffs, before even the season starts in their senior year. So this could all develop rather quickly. And having previous relationships like Avery Johnson and Kenny Dillingham is a big help for Oregon. That can also go another way, where you can have previous relationships like how a lot of players who now are committed to USC had previous relationships with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. So these are all things to watch for in the class 23. But like Erik was talking about, I'm really interested to see who specifically like Dillingham kind of hones in on as a quarterback, because we've kind of seen the change in philosophies. I feel like in terms of quarterback styles from like Joe Moorhead and the previous regime. But so far, there's no clear indicators on what a quarterback will have or what Oregon is going to want to see them have. The talent, I guess, like on paper, talent is a clear one, but that's pretty easy. And this is still, a long transition for this new Oregon staff that they're, just hitting the recruiting road now. So it'll be interesting to see and kind of follow who's being offered recently in this week in terms of quarterback cycles.
All right, we're going to move on to 2 questions, which I think are looking for specific answers, but we're going to kind of speak about them without knowing exactly what the answers are, but I think these are fun philosophical discussions just about what this new staff is going to try to do. So I admit, like, we don't have full answers to this, because these are topics that haven't been breached. Basically, we've had very little time to speak with the new staff. We haven't spoken on record with anybody besides Lanning. So I'm just giving that before we jump into this. From @PrincePuddles, how much of an influence will Dan Lanning have on an overall scheme of the offense, or will he simply hand over the offense to Coach Dillingham? Cristobal had a big influence over the overall scheme of the offense with more of a power run than what the offensive coordinators had before. #odds and audibles. The second part was his assessment of Cristobal, which I actually think is pretty accurate. I think there's some truth to that in terms of, I think he was pretty involved in what you were doing offensively, in part because he was a coach with an offensive background. And I think that's where I wanted to start in differentiating here. And again, as I said before we even got into the question, I read it. There's no full clarity yet of this answer, nor would I expect Dan Lanning to come out and really communicate exactly what that dynamic is yet. Maybe until we get into spring and fall football, of how impactful and how involved he wants to be in offensive game planning. My expectation is it's not very much. Dan Lanning is a defensive coach. He's a very, very high-end defensive game planner. Coach Dillingham has experience as an offensive game planner, as somebody who helps build game plans, as an offensive coordinator. I know the talk is he hasn't been a play caller, so that part is different. In terms of calling every play of a game is different than game planning. So I don't doubt Dillingham's ability to do that. I don't anticipate Lanning will want to overstep too much. In fact, you look at the schools that he's kind of been brought up at, both Georgia and Alabama. Those are two defensive-minded head coaches, which is where he kind of falls in line with. And both of them kind of give, I don't want to say full reign to the offensive coordinators, but they give quite a bit of leash and kind of let them do their thing, which is why you've seen, I think, both schools evolve and change philosophically on offense under both Kirby Smart at Georgia and Nick Saban at Alabama. Both those teams, you look what the offense have done, they've shifted with who's ever been in leadership positions at offense. And I think that's what you'll see with Lanning. And again, I say this without Dan Lanning having said it on the record, without hearing it necessarily even off the record, but just my expectation is Dan Lanning is going to say, Coach Dillingham, this is your baby. You go take care of this. This is your part of the ball. I'm going to take care of the defense. We've got a bunch of guys here to take care of special teams, but you're focused on offense. And I think you even saw a little bit of that with the hires that were made. The defensive hires, you go look at the guys they hired defensively. A lot of those people are people Dan Lanning has worked with or has some sort of connection to. The offensive staff, you look at, a lot of those are guys that maybe Dillingham had a little bit of a previous relationship. Not a lot, but a couple of them. Like, I thought Coach Laughlin is somebody he's worked with at Florida State. Obviously, he had a say in bringing him over. So I just look at this and think I'm expecting Dillingham's going to have quite a bit of autonomy to kind of run this offense and make this offense what he wants it to be. I don't anticipate Lanning is meddling too much. That doesn't mean he won't have any say, but my expectation is this is Dillingham's baby, and Lanning is pretty comfortable with that.
I don't think we know what this offense will look like yet. And the oversight that Lanning has, like, I'm sure he's got some kind of idea that, hey, I want us to be known to have a power run game and you fear our running backs and you feel our playmaking ability on the outside at the skill positions. But it doesn't pigeonhole you in any kind of system that you want to run on offense. And like Erik said, that will be Kenny Dillingham's responsibility as the offensive coordinator and the QB coach. So I know everyone wants, and it's kind of a weird time because this is the first time since Rich Brooks was hired that Oregon hired a defensive-minded coach. And offense is always going to be the thing that everyone gravitates towards, or most people will gravitate towards first. And we just don't know yet. Oregon has hired a coach in Kenny Dillingham that doesn't have his own personal system that he has run. Or it wasn't like a Chip Kelly where he had this blur offense that he was running at New Hampshire, or like a Joe Moorhead who had his own sophisticated spread. And this is Kenny Dillingham's opportunity to create that system of what he wants to be known for. And we just don't know what it's going to look like right now.
Yeah, I've been on record for saying that I'm a fan of when a staff is comprised of like a CEO, head coach, a separate offensive coordinator, and a separate defensive coordinator. I don't know, that to me, that's just like how an NFL kind of model is. It's how Saban has run it at Alabama. That's how Kirby Smart is kind of doing it at Georgia. And I think those ways kind of win. This is my second favorite type, where the head coach is defensive minded and he just does nothing with the offense and just says, "Here, whoever you are, take control, do your thing." Because for some reason, I find that in terms of team success on offense, when a head coach just leaves it up to the offensive coordinator, things run a little more smoothly rather than when a defensive head coach and a defensive coordinator work together. I just feel like there's more of an opportunity to find the same common ground on a defensive ideology rather than on an offensive ideology. And whether I'm just talking out of my butt or I actually have knowledge about this is yet to be seen. We'll find out eventually with Oregon staff. But to me, from a very general perspective, I don't feel like Lanning is going to be involved with the offense at all. And I think that's probably for the better. I can tell you he will be involved in offensive recruiting. I talked to four-star offensive tackle Miles McVay the other day, whose primary recruiter is Adrian Clem, but he told me that every time that Adrian Clem is on the call, so is Dan Lanning. So he's somebody who's going to be helping out offensive recruiting, that's for sure. But other than that, in terms of play calling, scheme, ideas, I don't think he's going to be in Kenny Dillingham's pocket like how maybe Mario Cristobal was with his offensive coordinators. And whether Mario was truly involved that much with his offensive coordinators, we'll probably not know. It certainly seemed like it at points, and maybe there are plenty of plays over the course of a season that point to that direction. But I don't anticipate that happening with Lanning. I anticipate it to be how Georgia was ran, with Kirby Smart as a really defensive-minded head coach who was a former DC at Alabama for 6 to 8 years. I can't remember which it was, who helps control the defensive side of the ball. And he knows a good offense from a bad offense because he coaches defense, so he knows what'll work and what won't work. So I would imagine that Lanning has some sort of perspective on what he wants his offense at Oregon to look like. And I would imagine that viewpoint of what his offense wants to look like is a primary reason as to why he hired Dillingham as the offensive coordinator role, because his offense, his relationship with Dillingham, that all feeds into what he anticipates Oregon's offense to look like this upcoming season. And we don't know what that'll look like. We have clips of Dillingham's work at Auburn and Florida State, but he wasn't the primary play caller. He learned under Mike Norvell at multiple stops, including Memphis with Dan Lanning, who's an excellent offensive coordinator and offensive mind. So it'll be a work in progress, but I'm super excited to see where Lanning goes on the field when spring practices roll around, because Cristobal was always with the offensive line and on the offensive side of the field. Not always, but for the most part, because that was his position group. That was his style. He was an offensive-minded head coach. So I'm assuming Lanning is going to be on the defensive side and just let Dillingham roam free. So I'm excited to watch that. But yeah, I would anticipate Lanning just letting the offense go. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
Should also note just that the two first hires that were made were Kenny Dillingham and Matt Powledge in terms of assistant coaches. And those were made almost instantaneous to Dan Lanning's hire. I think it's very notable. Those are clearly guys he wanted here and prioritized here and has confidence in their vision for what their roles are. Because these are two of the higher, in terms of responsibilities, Dillingham runs the offense and Powledge is co-defensive coordinator. Those are two positions you don't just hand out. You don't hand those out early without knowing and feeling confident in the guys. So I think that part should play a role. I think clearly Dillingham has a vote of confidence from Lanning, which is obvious. He's his offensive coordinator, and you don't bring him out here if you want to get in the way and meddle with him.
Yeah.
I think he wants to let him do his
right.
thing. So, put that concern to rest. All right, the next one from @Smucker_Ben. Looking at Georgia's depth chart, Lanning seems to like big defensive linemen, and he put in parentheses all 280 plus, most over 300 pounds, and fast linebackers 225 to 240 pounds. What do you think Lanning does with Oregon's tweeners like Mace Funa, Trevin Maai, Jake Shipley, Braden Swinson, and maybe even DJ Johnson, who are all 255 to 270? I think this is an interesting question, right? And again, as I said, I kind of prefaced it earlier. I don't have a clear answer here. Sorry, the staff is being established. We have not seen spring practice. We have not heard from Dan Lanning one way or the other on this. I do think this is notable, though, and he's not wrong in terms of the way Georgia constructed its defense. It's possible Dan Lanning has. I don't necessarily know if Dan Lanning is necessarily bringing the Georgia defense to Oregon. I think he's going to develop his own defense, and maybe there'll be some alterations there personnel-wise in terms of how they want to employ packages. But I will also say, like, DJ Johnson isn't that far off from being somebody who could put a hand in the dirt and play as a defensive lineman. In fact, 2 years ago, that's exactly what he was doing in 2019. Close to 280 pounds at that point, too. Mace Funa, I think, could definitely put his hand in the dirt and play as a defensive end if he wanted to. He's not at the 280, 300-pound mark. I think Funa and Maai and Shipley, though, I'm curious to see how those three are employed in particular, because those guys have almost exclusively played standing up in previous years. I don't know how well that transition works with some of the stuff we saw with Georgia. Just because you think of the athletes that they had running side to side, and I don't look at those three guys as guys I necessarily think can play space sideline to sideline quite the same way as you would like an Adrian Jackson, who I think, by the way, that's a good fit for him in terms of he fits sort of what you saw with a lot of those Georgia linebackers. I think Braden Swinson can also kind of, I know he's a little heavier in build. Maybe he leans down a little bit. Maybe he goes up. I mean, I know when he was recruited as a player who put his hand down and then, again, similar to what we saw with DJ Johnson, kind of moved to a standing position because that was more of a fit with what Tim DeRuyter's done. Some of this is going to, again, be philosophical in nature, and we don't have clear-cut answers because the coach has not been here long enough to really give them to us. So we don't have a clear answer here, but I do think this is like a really interesting question of what these body types are interesting to me. I think Swinson and DJ make sense. I think those guys can play at the hand of the dirt pretty easily. The other three guys just haven't done it yet. And so I'll be curious to see kind of how they fit. That doesn't mean they won't be utilized. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them utilized in a variety of ways. And I think I would expect Dan Lanning. One of the questions I do want to ask is just how much of your defense is going to be, this is defense driven, and how much is going to be personnel driven? Like how creative and multiple are you willing to get based upon different styles and talents you have on the roster? So, but a lot to kind of unpack there. I just don't know if we have an answer, is my guess, my long-winded way of saying it.
Yeah, I'm not sure yet of how we're going to move around players and where they're going to line up. I think that's probably what make this defense so tough, and what's probably made Georgia's defense under Dan Lanning so tough is position versatility. Because what was like one of the staples for Dan Lanning at Georgia, that they brought a ton of pressures from all over the football field. And I think you look at Oregon and you say they probably can do some of the things that Georgia was doing from a schematic pressure or a schematic standpoint, because they have the position versatility. Like you said, Erik, Mace Funa could be a defensive end, and then on the next play, he's got the athletic ability to be like an outside linebacker and drop into coverage, or to attack the line of scrimmage from a different spot on the football field. Or a Trevor Maai is another one that fits that type of mold. I would almost argue Braden Swinson too. DJ Johnson for sure. So I think you look at these guys and kind of like the offense, like we're going to learn a lot of these questions, their answers at spring football when Oregon staff is able to get on the field with its players and actually roll through different schemes, different plays, different formations to figure out what best suits Oregon. And that's the biggest thing is, yes, you want to be able to 100% replicate what Georgia was doing on defense now at Oregon. That would make the most simple sense. But if it's like putting a square peg through a round hole, you got to adapt. And I think that's where we're at right now is Oregon's trying to figure out that, hey, do we have the pieces in place now to replicate and do exactly what we want to do? Or are we going to have to tweak a couple things to maybe get the same end result, but they come in different manners? Like, not to flip it back to the offense. Like, everyone wants to know what the offense is running. Like, and Dillingham may have this desire of, hey, I want to be running 3 wide, 4 wide receiver sets all the time, but they don't have the depth for that. And what if Oregon's 2 best or what if Oregon's 4 best receivers, what if 3 of those guys are tight ends? Or what if out of your 4 best receivers, Troy Franklin, Dante Thornton, Seven McGee, and a tight end are your 4 best pass catchers, but you also realize you have to have Byron Cardwell on the field at all times, or a CJ Verdell, or maybe Dye comes back. Well, now all of a sudden you're going to be running 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, and 2 running back sets. So like that could flip over to the defensive side of the ball too. Like, hey, we've got 3 elite defensive tackles on this team. We need to be able to have all 3 of them on the football field as often as we can. That could dictate what they do with everybody else. So I think spring ball will have a lot of these answers.
To go back to the question, where it says Lanning seems to like big defensive linemen who are 280 to 300 pounds and fast linebackers who are 225 to 240. If Oregon could recruit 5 stars from Georgia and Alabama in the South, they too would like those types of players. So that is, it's a blessing for Georgia to have those kind of players in their backyard and to have the type of success that they've had, because they can recruit these guys rather easily. Oregon has their handful of just natural talents and pure athletic specimens on the team. But this list, this Mace Funa, Trevin Mai, Jake Shipley, DJ Johnson, and Braden Swinson, those are guys who are the tweeners, like Smucker Ben asked. And those guys all Oregon has to figure out what to do with those guys specifically. And this is a really good question about it, because I can anticipate either all of these guys gaining weight in terms of putting a hand down and potentially playing a defensive end role, or I could see all of these guys losing weight and trying to shift them into a hybrid linebacker, maybe a hand down type of role that you saw like Kayvon Thibodeau play sometimes this year, and which was a shame. He should have always had a hand down on the line. But I look at someone like Jake Shipley. I think he's a candidate to bulk up. I think he's better suited to be a pass rusher. I like a Trevin Mai. And I think he's also another candidate to be a pass rusher, edge setter on defense, which is kind of what he was last year. I don't know if he has the lateral mobility to do what a Dan Lanning defense does with their linebacker core. Same with Mace Funa. I think Braden Swinson could slim down and become one of those because he's just a pure athlete. I don't necessarily know, as we saw last year, he has a great speed rush, but I don't necessarily know if he has anything more than that in terms of his power rush or bull rush. And if you can slim him down, you eliminate the need to really, have a bull rush for him to develop that, because now he's sort of an outside linebacker, right outside linebacker role where he's in coverage or he's blitzing or he's, dropping back and man-to-man on a tight end, which I think he's something that he can do at his size and length. And for DJ Johnson, I think this year he'll potentially become a full defensive end. I think Oregon's tight end room is pretty good. They're going to miss him on offense in terms of his blocking, because although DJ Johnson caught 1 pass this year as a tight end against Ohio State, his blocking was instrumental to some of Oregon's success. And without him, the final 3 games towards the regular season, you saw that Oregon's rushing offense was pretty good, but it wasn't where it was. And that can also be related to DJ Johnson. It could be related to Johnny Johnson and Jalen Redd and their top wide receiver blockers going out too. But I think his best natural talent is lining up with a hand in the ground on defense. And bulking him up to that 275, 280 range and keeping his natural athleticism and developing him a little bit more under Lanning and Tony Tuioti. I think it's going to be really helpful for an Oregon team that lacks a pure pass rusher, especially in the absence of Kayvon Thibodeau. So there are a lot of players who I think could play both sides or not both sides of the ball, but both ways, where in terms of hand in the ground, dropping back into coverage and an outside linebacker type. I'm interested to see what they'll do with Noah Sewell. I think they'll keep him as a linebacker specifically, but without a pure pass rusher, I'm kind of under the impression that they're going to use him as extra help a lot. And I'm not sure if they're going to play him in that outside linebacker role where he's primarily a pass rusher off the edge, because I think he has a great combination of speed and power, or if they're going to put him where he has played the last couple of seasons, that Mike linebacker spot or that Will linebacker spot, and let him be a full-time linebacker. I think they're going to have to get creative, and it starts with specific body types and specific player skill levels. But this is another topic that is going to have to wait until spring ball, until we see something set in stone and really have an idea of what's going to happen.
I can't wait to watch practice, guys. It's been a long time since we've been able to do it. It's one of my favorite parts of the job is going out there with the clipboard and a notepad and just marking down who's working with which groups. I think from a personnel perspective, the first week or so of spring ball, assuming Dan lets us in. Dan, let us in. If there's any way you hear this podcast, we want to watch. We want to see we want to get an idea. Because I think, as we've established, there's a lot of guys positionally that'll be interesting to see where they line up, what groups are working with on both sides of the football. So I think that's a good way to end that. We're going to get into a couple of basketball questions. I want to kind of combine these because they're very similar. But let's start with this one from @ZBGreen1. Was the SoCal trip an aberration, or has the team clicked similar to previous Dane Altman teams? If so, why are they playing so much better? # odds and audibles. Matt, let's start here in terms of what's going on. This was a pretty impressive week. This followed, I think, a couple of weeks where they played a little bit better as well. So it seems like there is definitely improvements. Are we buying this as a full-on, the Dane Altman second half of the season run is beginning, or are you still concerned about some things?
Yes and no. You have to acknowledge the fact that they went and straight up dominated 2 top 5 teams. I mean, they were the better team in both games, and but they also did it without fans. I think that has to be acknowledged. The atmospheres at USC and UCLA were anything but hostile. USC traditionally doesn't have a large home crowd. They don't really have a home environment. But even then, if you get 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people in that arena, it will make some noise. And there was like 200 people in that arena. Poly Pavilion certainly would have been hostile. But the way they played in those 2 games, I don't think it would have mattered if the fans were there. So you look at this team and you see one that's now won, 5 games in a row. That's good. And you just don't stumble into that, especially when 3 of those have come on the road. One of them being at Oregon State. They had a really good win against Utah when they won 79-66. So I think this team is starting to turn the corner. Now, I'll be curious to see how they handle their next 4 games. They play Washington State on Thursday. They play Washington on Sunday. And then a week from tomorrow, they play Colorado at home in a makeup game that was supposed to be on the 30th of December. And then they host Oregon State for the second time in basically 2.5 weeks. You almost, if they're as good as we all hope they are, and some people are saying they are and that they're back, they go 4-0 in that stretch. You can't lose at home, especially to these teams. I mean, Colorado is a solid piece. They're 12-4 on the year. They're 4-2 in the league. They're outside of the NCAA tournament, but they're kind of one of those well, if they get some good, impressive wins, they could get their way in. Washington State and Washington are not good. The Huskies are 8-7, 3-2 in Pac-12 play. Cougars, they're 10-7. They're 3-3 in Pac-12 play, and then Oregon State's just flat out bad. They're 3-13 on the year. They're 1-5 in Pac-12 play. Their only win being against Utah, who's even worse than them in Pac-12 play. So I look at this and say they got to go 4-0, and ideally, look, the most important thing is win, but ideally over these 4 games, you kind of want to expect 2, maybe even 3 of them being games where it's not a concern at the end of the game of who wins.
100%. With 4 home games after a 5-game winning streak, especially over 2 top 5 opponents, you would look to say that Oregon was going to win all 4 of those games. I won't say that they have to, but it's as pretty close as it gets to saying you should probably win all 4 of those games, especially at home against lesser competition and against 2 of your rivals. Those are huge momentum boosters after they've already had a lot of momentum already. To me, the USC game was much more impressive than the UCLA game. And I'll tell you why. Against UCLA, there was a really hard-fought game. Both teams battled their butts off. And Oregon ultimately remained on top after a stellar overtime period. But there were still a lot of moments of what made this Oregon team so frustrating to watch towards the end, whether it's the turnover late underneath the basket with a couple seconds left on the clock to tie the game, just silly turnovers, the whole first half, the pure inability to make a shot, which has plagued Oregon over and over and over again this season. Just wide open looks, great ball movement, layups, things like that, where they just couldn't knock them down. And then things started to flip in the second half. They came out and hit their first 5 threes, I believe. I know for a fact it was their first 4. I think they hit their 5th attempt as well later in the half. But those were all open looks too. It was all either great ball movement to the top of the key to like Eric Williams or Jacob Young, or as Will Richardson making his own shot and hitting off the dribble, which is something he has shown pretty well in the last couple of games. So the second half against UCLA and the overtime period is what flew into the USC game, where Oregon truly dominated the Trojans. That game, it got down to 10 or 8 points towards the end of the second half or the end of the game, but that was completely dominated by Oregon. That's the team you expected to see early in the season. It's a fully healthy squad. It's now a confident squad. And after UCLA, Will Richardson has said that things have started to click. I think they really clicked in overtime. Will Richardson found a shot. He found his confidence, a lot of confidence too, not just like, oh, I think I can make this. He's like, I can make these shots. And most importantly, Jacob Young now feels the same way. And with him on the team as a secondary scorer, he could do it in all facets just like Richardson can, whether that's transition layups, getting downhill, pull-up, spot-up three-pointers, just making good rotational passes. I think that this team is flowing really well offensively right now. Things have clicked just like they always do with the Dana Altman team. It's like clockwork. You can set your clock to it every single year. Sometime in December or January, Oregon's team is going to find and turn a corner. But yeah, this is just a really impressive road trip to Los Angeles. The fans thing, I don't really buy too much into that. They played the entire season last year without fans. People should know how to do that and get up for it if they can. But I think moving into this 4-game home strip, these are 4 games that Oregon should win and almost need to at this point.
All right, last one from @DuckYODuck. Why is there so little national buzz about Oregon men's basketball beating 2 top 5 teams in just 3 days? Are they not giving the Pac-12 any credibility? #odds and audibles. By the way, the latest polls have come out. The AP poll is out. Oregon had 15 votes, and in the coaches, they had 5. Overall resumes, though, it's sort of understanding they're not in the top 25, considering the fact that they didn't have any quality wins, really, or very, very few that you would really tip your cap on in terms of a resume coming in. I don't know, Matt, do you feel like there's not been enough attention to this? I mean, it's pretty significant. What was this, the first time the Pac-12 has ever seen it happen, and the first time since 71 maybe or something? I don't know. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it's 75, 76 since Clemson went back-to-back in a 5-day span to win games over teams ranked in the top 5. And Oregon did it in 3 days, not just 5. It is getting some discussion. I mean, ESPN has Oregon as the team of the week. CBS Sports, they had Oregon as one of the winners of the weekend. I know Gary Parrish, Matt Norlander, on Basketball Podcast, they spent some time discussing it, the UCLA win, and then they also discussed later on Sunday the USC win. We've seen the Field of 68. They've discussed instant live reaction of the UCLA win. And then I think they did a discussion point on their podcast this week that came out on Sunday or maybe Monday morning about Oregon as well. So there is some discussion out there. I didn't think they would be ranked, though. I mean, they've got some really bad losses under their name here. Arizona State at home is a quad 3 loss at home. That's bad. That's going to weigh you down significantly. They lost by 30 plus to BYU and Houston. That can't happen. And so the fact that they're receiving votes is a good thing. It's people noticed it. And I think you also, though, have to factor in there weren't crowds. So while it counts as a road win, it's not what a normal road win would look like. They didn't have to fight through the adversity of playing against a home crowd. And I think that maybe weighs a little bit on it. And then, the Pac-12 isn't good and, hasn't been good for quite some time. And last year they sent all those teams to the Elite Eight. They had a team in the Final Four. And all offseason they've talked about how this was going to be, a continuation of last year. And yes, they had 3 teams in the top 6 last week: Arizona, UCLA, USC. Well, USC lost twice last week. They haven't really played anybody on their schedule. Now they're playing conference games. They're starting to lose. UCLA has played 2 teams of importance in non-con. They beat a Villanova team who's pretty good. And then they got absolutely waxed by Gonzaga. Arizona is good. They have 1 loss on the year, which was, I believe, at Illinois. But the teams that were supposed to be good, Oregon, they have floundered out of the jump. Washington State was supposed to be a team the league was hyping up as a potential tournament team. I thought they would be. They're not good. Oregon State was a team that went to the Elite Eight, and they lose their best player in Ethan Thompson, yes. And Reichel doesn't come back as well. But everybody else from that team is back, and they've won 3 games this year. They are hugely disappointing from a preseason expectation. Stanford is not where they are supposed to be. So ASU is not where they are supposed to be. So this league they haven't done their job in non-con, and they didn't win a bunch of big games. And so it's going to be tough sledding for this league to become the focal point of a discussion point for a week for another season.
Yeah, Matt, you hit the nail on the head there. It's why is there no real national buzz? It's because it's the Pac-12. These are games where technically Oregon should be losing. These are 2 top 5 teams in the country at home against an unranked Oregon team who, while they do have talent, they aren't ranked. They've had an up and down season. They've been disappointing, frankly, considering their preseason expectations. And UCLA was, I guess you could still say, is a national champion contender. They were right there last year. This is a Pac-12 issue at its whole. It's really great for Oregon to have 2 top 5 wins on the road. That's great for their resume. That's hugely important for trying to get into tournament. And they do deserve some more buzz, but it kind of says a lot of things about the Pac-12 more than it does about Oregon's talent. Like literally all the reasons that Matt just outlined. This has been a rather disappointing year for the Pac-12 in general, and it doesn't get more disappointing than your 2 of your top 3 teams from a national perspective losing at home, getting beat by a disappointing Oregon team on national television. And that's another factor. UCLA was played at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the USC win was played at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So most of the country lives on the East Coast, and I could tell you that not a lot of people stayed up for those games. So all the ESPN, Bristol, Connecticut, New York City, all those little towns in Connecticut. That's where those people who get paid to watch the sports live and work. They're probably not staying up for all these games, and that's just what happens when you play in the Pac-12. So you might not get as much publicity as a team who beats Duke, who goes to Illinois and wins. Whenever Florida State's really good, teams like that. And that's been an issue with the Pac-12 for a long time, and their seeds getting underseeded for the tournament, not enough eyes on them, and that's just what happens. It's a Pac-12 issue. They're not on national TV enough. I can go to football too, but yeah, those are the reasons to me why this isn't getting enough buzz. I think it's gotten some good buzz within the Oregon community. Now people are going to start to pay attention to both teams because the women's have an opportunity to beat 2 straight top 10 teams as well, starting on Monday against UConn. So that'll be a nationally televised game at a normal hour too. So that'll be a good brand representation right there for Oregon. So yeah, Pac-12,
this is what frustrated me about the USC game. What was the lead up? What game was the lead up for Oregon USC on FS1 Saturday night? That forced Oregon to tip off at 8:00 at night.
I don't even know.
Seabiscuit.
Oh,
yeah. What a
FS1
game.
was showing a movie. Seabiscuit.
Pac-12,
lead
baby.
up to Oregon playing USC. I mean, why that game had to be played at 8:00 is beyond me. I mean, I guess you could argue, well, they didn't want to compete against the NFL playoffs. Well, guess what? Like, it doesn't really matter what time you're playing it at, because the people that are going to watch that game are going to watch that game even if the playoffs are going on or not going on. So there was no point in playing it at 8:00. And basically, what person on the East Coast just went, oh man, I watched a great NFL game. It's now 11:15 Saturday night. You know what? I'm just going to sit here at home and I'm not going to go out, or I'm not going to go to bed. I'm going to watch Oregon USC, 2 teams I have probably very little connection to see them play. Put that game on at 6:00 or 7:00 even. And that's where I think a lot of people out west get frustrated is you're not gaining anything by playing the game even later into the night from an East Coast perspective. And so just do away with it and put your product on a time that fits ideally for that region the game is being played in, instead of at 8:00 at night and allowing a movie that's over 15 years old to be played, maybe even older than that, to play.
Tobey Maguire has never been better.
Never.
Never been better.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you so much for submitting your questions. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back Wednesday. Maybe more basketball talk, depending upon what happens later today with Oregon UConn, maybe some Oregon football recruiting, maybe more news on just Oregon's roster in general. Until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.